It's pretty easy to hit the repeat button as we approach and go through our fall cow work, from preconditioning to weaning to preg checking. Now, some of you may have to reevaluate due to drought, while others can do what's been traditionally done. But the question is what you're doing leaving you at a net positive or a net negative financially when the dust settles? For example, on your calves.
Do we recoup that additional cost through improved price at the sale barn? I think that's something we all need to think about.
Now, how about your cows?
Cull cow marketing is probably a number one of those that I think we just don't put enough time and effort into marketing those.
Dr. Steve Paisley with the University of Wyoming is my guest today as we talk about what you can do to make the most of your fall cow work this year on this episode of the Working Ranch Radio Show. And we welcome you back here again to the Working Ranch Radio Show. I'm Justin Mills. We're glad to have you joining us. And I say welcome back to those of you that are familiar with the show. We appreciate you joining us as you have in the past and hope you enjoy this week's show. Now, if this is your first time catching the Working Ranch Radio Show, I want to welcome you in and hope you enjoy our program here today. We're going to talk more about that in just a few moments. Now, of course, there's a couple ways you can listen. As you know, those that are listening on the radio, well, you got that figured out. And for those that have downloaded it via podcast, well, you've got that figured out. So those are the two ways. And of course, the podcast site that's out there, you can go there and not only can you listen to this week's show again, but you can also go back and listen to previous shows that we've had. And we've had some great shows on the Working Ranch Radio Show this past summer. Now, one of the things that I do try to do, occasionally it doesn't always work this way, but I do try to bring up to and have topics on our show that I believe have some shelf life, that you can go back and you can listen to it 6 months, a year, 2 years down the road, and there's going to be some relevance to it. And I think today's program kind of fits that slot as well. Dr. Steve Paisley is going to be my guest. He's with the University of Wyoming. He runs the research station out of Lingle, Wyoming. Now, I've had him on the show before, as he used to be the beef extension specialist for the University of Wyoming. And so we've had him on the show. Today, though, we're going to be talking about just getting the most out of your fall work as we take this time. I know for some of you, you've probably already preconditioned calves. Maybe some of you've already weaned, especially those in drier conditions. You're short on feed and you've had to do some things a little bit different, but we're going to just talk about this. And even though for some of you, maybe we're past some of this activity for you already, it's still something you can stick in the back of your head and think, now next year, maybe we need to reevaluate some things. And that's really the purpose of this show, is looking at our fall work. Are we getting the most out of it? Is what we are doing putting money back in our pocket at the end of the day, or is it taking money out? Because really, it needs to be putting money in our pocket. And so I think that's really the essence of what we are getting at here today. So I hope you join us for our program again today. Dr. Steve Paisley is my guest as we talk about this subject of fall work with our cattle. Of course, towards the end of the program, meteorologist Don Day will be joining us as we not only take a look at our long-term weather, but he's going to tell us what is the purpose of hurricanes. Well, you'll hear the answer to that question when he joins us later on in the show. Right now, I would like to thank the sponsors of the Working Ranch Radio Show, Gelbvieh and Balancer, the smart, reliable, and profitable choice. For more information, go to gelbvieh.org. And Zoetis, visit inheritprogress.com to request a call with a rep and ask about free TSUs to get you started. That is subject to availability. Also, speaking of Zoetis, it is the little things that can derail progress, but your herd can be covered. Visit getlessparasites.com for solutions from Zoetis. Also, the American Akaushi Association. Experience the difference at akaushi.com. And Biozyme, it's weaning time. Yes, it is. We're going to be talking about it today. So for protection and recovery, think VitaCharge by Biozyme. For more information, visit vitafirm.com/Vita-charge. Well, it's time now to check in with the captain, Tim O'Byrne. He is the publisher and editor of Working Ranch Magazine for this week's edition of Tim's 2 Cents.
Hey, Justin, this Tim's 2 Cents is more of a shout out to all those amazing ranch moms and grandmothers and daughters and nieces and nephews and brothers and uncles and dads, everybody that contributed to every single amazing ranch branding meal or in the field, harvest time, haying and silaging, dinner, lunch, breakfast, early breakfast in cow camp. Anybody that contributed to those amazing meals, and we know, I can smell them right now, so many good breakfasts and so many good dinners. And hard work and great food go together so well. We are so blessed in this country to have access to amazing food and great folks to prepare it for us. That's my shout out. I can almost smell the biscuits. I can smell the bacon, the barbecued beef, and the buns, and the scalloped potatoes and the corn. I can't wait. I gotta go. I'm gonna have to make myself a hamburger. So thanks a lot, folks. This is Tim's 2 cents. Back to you, Justin, in the booth.
All right, Captain. Well, now that you've got everybody's mouth watering a little bit, I guess it brought up some memories as you were talking about that, because my mom always did a great job of putting together, amazing food for the crews when they came and helped. And one of the things that I remember always made her pretty popular with everybody when they came was she made Long Johns. And I don't know if that terminology is the same for everyone, but it was, of course, a donut with a maple frosting on it, and then cinnamon rolls. And that was just one of the things that when they came to the Millses, that was something that my mom always did, and people always remembered that. So some great memories with that, was you were talking about that as well. Well, folks, we're going to get into our featured interview here in a little bit as we talk about these activities for fall, such as preconditioning, weaning, or preg checking, these activities that bring us all together. We're going to talk more about these, and are we getting the most out of them? That's going to be the focus of our conversation today when we're joined by Dr. Steve Paisley when we return on the Working Ranch Radio Show.
How do you decide which heifers to select or sell? Visual inspection alone leaves a lot to chance. Back your hunch with Inherit Select from Zoetis. It's a genetic test designed for commercial replacement heifers. You gain valuable predictions, including cow fertility, size and soundness, feed efficiency, growth and carcass merit, as well as easy-to-use economic indexes. This improves your selection, breeding, and marketing decisions. Request a call from InheritProgress.com and ask about free TSUs to get you started.
It's weaning time, one of the biggest days of the year for you and the most stressful for your calves. Ensure a smooth transition with the VitaCharge weaning program. This two-step program with the AmmoFirm Advantage gives calves the nutritional boost they need to get through the first weeks of weaning, accelerate appetite, increase weight gain, and improve health. It's weaning time. Get them ready with VitaCharge. For more information, visit vitafirm.com/Vita-Charge. And we welcome you back here to the Working Ranch Radio Show. Justin Mills with you as we head into our featured interview today. And we are going to be talking about something that is timely to this time of the year for a lot of folks that ship and wean calves here in the fall of the year, or market their calves in the fall of the year. We are approaching that time for some that maybe you've already done it, and some of you probably haven't, and that's preconditioning, and then maybe looking down the road at whether or not you want to choose to wean or not. We're going to be talking all about that here today. Joining us as my guest, he's been on our show before, Dr. Steve Paisley. He's with University of Wyoming, director of the research station there out of Lingle, Wyoming. Also, he is the state BQA coordinator as well. So we're going to have some dialogue here today, I'm sure, that relates to both of those. But Dr. Paisley, first of all, I want to thank you for joining us here today on the Working Ranch Radio Show.
You bet. Thank you for the opportunity, and looking forward to it.
Well, so when we get to this time of the year, as you and I were talking before we went on air here, we were talking about this, what we do with our cattle this time of the year, looking at preconditioning, and I know there's some folks that maybe they don't precondition their calves, and they take them right from the cow and they market them, and there's, I'm sure, if there's a pencil you can put to that, maybe it works for some, maybe it doesn't. But today we are going to be talking about if for those that choose to precondition, was just some of the things they need to do with that. And I think really, as I was thinking of some questions ahead of time, Dr. Paisley, I think one of the things we have to really start to do is there's a couple things is look at when do we want to market our calves, and then back up from there in addition to when are we putting bulls out. And I think based upon those, we can start to set some times or some dates of when's a really optimal time to be preconditioning.
I think that's exactly right. We need to do the calendar math and try and plan some of those things. Many years like this year for everyone, the weather kind of dictates when we do things, forage production, how much grass is in the pastures. A lot of those things dictate when we do things, but, do some planning ahead of time, I think can really make things go more smoothly. And, for example, I've had several calls this fall already, everybody kind of rethinking their schedule. And we probably, like you said, we need to decide when we're going to market based on the amount of grass we still have left, based on when we can get help, all of those types of things, and backtrack and try and make sure if we are going to precondition, we maybe should define what preconditioning is a little bit, but when we're going to give those initial vaccines and make sure we do that in a timely manner so we get the full benefit from that preconditioning and we don't create more trouble for ourselves later on.
You bet. Well, and as we were talking beforehand, one of the key elements in this whole concept of fall work with our cattle is really, what can we do to reduce the amount of stress in these cattle? We know that stress is one of the biggest reasons that causes sickness, death, loss in our cattle. And so from that standpoint, we look at, what are ways that we can reduce that stress? And so from your mindset, as you look at preconditioning, what are some of those ways? I know this is where the BQA stuff might kind of come into this conversation as well, but from your perspective, what are some of the ways that we can reduce stress in these cattle during preconditioning?
I think ways we can address that is, first of all, maybe when we can gather those cattle, hopefully we can pick times that are relatively cool. Hopefully we can do it early in the morning. Try and isolate that into time periods where we can reduce heat stress on the cattle. Maybe even we don't do it all in one day. Maybe we can move them closer to our working facilities one morning and pick another morning to move them a little bit further. Maybe we can divide up some of the activities we need to or management we need to do with those cattle and just try and give those cattle enough time to rest and recover as we do it. I know we preconditioned it at home. We preconditioned and vaccinated heifers, and we had our first calf heifers in. We're trying to preg test those. Well, by the time we get everything done, it's 3 or 4 o'clock in the afternoon, and the cattle are tired. We're tired. We're grumpy. Trying to manage that and schedule some of these things so we can reduce the amount of stress just from a time management standpoint. Other things to address too while you're at it is, how we handle those cattle and can we work them quietly? Can we work them slowly? Just some of the basic fundamentals. A lot of times we look at our watch or we look at the temperature and we're trying to speed up and we try to do things more quickly and that ends up just hurting us later on. So, work cattle slowly, kind of understanding the basic fundamentals or concepts of pressure and release, getting cattle to respond to what you want them to do. And all of those types of things, I think, can reduce stress. And that's beneficial all the way through. Not only do you end up producing calmer cattle, but I think you reduce the stress and you improve the vaccine response to those cattle once you do get that vaccine in them and go through the preconditioning process. You
mentioned something just a bit ago, and maybe I jumped ahead into some other conversation here first, but it says maybe, defining what preconditioning is. That could be different for different folks. So maybe let's back up a little bit and let's put some definition to preconditioning.
Yeah. In a lot of cases, we've had to define what preconditioning is through some of the marketing avenues we have for our cattle. So if you market your cattle on a video or you work through some of the organized programs that are out there, preconditioning can mean a back 45 program where we have a specific set of vaccines that we need to give to those cattle, which includes a 45-day dry lot period or 45-day weaning period before those cattle are marketed. So the traditional back 45 type of a program is that. That doesn't necessarily, I mean, if you market your cattle based on that and you've got them listed based on that type of a program, it's important to follow those protocols, make sure it's documented so that you can remain in compliance with those marketing programs. But there are other options and alternatives out there. If you're like many of us this year and we've got a limited amount of meadow hay or a limited amount of grass down around our receiving pens, we're probably not looking at a traditional dry lot receiving program or traditional dry lot weaning program. Getting some type of vaccination or preconditioning into those cattle, preferably 3 to 4 weeks prior to weaning, is just critical. And so if you can manage that, if you can get cattle in prior, preferably 3 weeks prior to weaning, and get your first round of vaccines in those cattle, I think it's beneficial all the way around. I would encourage, regardless of how you choose to market those cattle, documenting, what products you used, the timing of when you gave those shots. Even if you're going to sell those cattle through the local livestock auction, I think providing that information is important to those buyers. I think that means something to all of them, and I think not only documenting, writing it down, keeping track of what you did, but also communicating that to the buyers is a really important step.
And we do see, whether you're selling at the sale barn or whether you're selling across off the ranch through video sales or so forth, those outlets being a lot. I mean, they're definitely more proactive in their efforts to try to get that information from us. But sometimes, it's probably one of the simplest things that we can do is just write on that piece of paper, here's when we gave branding shots, here's when we did preconditioning shots. And it's something that really, it's one of the simplest things to do that some folks just aren't doing.
That's right. And I think it's really important. We receive cattle here at our research station outside of Lingle. We currently brought in 120 bulls to go through our feed efficiency testing. So these are weaned calves. And we received them just because of the situation. Everybody's facing dry conditions, limited amount of forage. We received a set of bulls that had only been weaned 2 weeks. And that's kind of a tough time to receive cattle. And so I think buyers are aware of that as well. If you can kind of control that timing, making sure you've got at least 3 weeks on that preconditioning shot before those cattle are marketed, I think you're beneficial to it. So if you, that's a critical information that those buyers would like to know.
When we bring these cattle in and we do the preconditioning, what are some other things that we could be doing to take advantage of that time of we've got those cattle in the corral? Is there other things we could be doing at that time? Not maybe just with our calves, but with our cows as well.
I think there definitely is. Certainly we can be sorting those calves. Maybe we've got the ability to sort our herd into steers and heifers to at least get it part of that initial sort out of the way before we wean calves. If you think about shrink and how we market our cattle, and depending on how you market those animals, the less we handle those cattle, the more quietly we handle those cattle, the less shrink we get on those cattle, the less amount of stress. And so anything we can do ahead of time to reduce stress at the time of weaning, I think is really important. So if we can sort steers and heifers and pair those off in that manner, I think that's something to consider. Another option that might be of interest to some people is, we could Preg test at preconditioning, whether it's with the veterinarian or maybe you choose to do a blood test on those cattle. Getting that information and having that information handy for when you do wean will reduce the amount of work that you do the day of weaning. Maybe will just allow you to sort those cattle at the day of weaning rather than Preg testing and everything else. Those are all options to think about. And any additional work maybe that you need to do to those cows prior to weaning is beneficial. So I think, planning ahead, as we mentioned before, whether it's choosing your vaccine, and maybe even if we step back before that, if we have some idea when we're going to wean those calves, thinking about your mineral program, maybe 60 to 90 days prior to weaning, and addressing some of those types of things as early as that can help and improve response to vaccination, improve your overall herd health, reduce your amount of sickness. all of those things can be factors, and that's all information that you can communicate once you do decide to market those cattle.
You bet. Dr. Steve Paisley is my guest today as we are talking just this fall time of year and what we do with our cattle as ranchers. It's pretty common for a lot of folks. And we were talking quite a bit about preconditioning. When we come back, we're going to talk more about weaning side of things and some of the things that we can do there. Again, it's getting back to, at the end of the day, how do we reduce the stress in these cattle and make them so when they go on to the next spot, they're healthy for whether it's the buyer, the feedlot, the winter wheat grass field that they're going to go to, whatever that may be, and we want that to be a good situation for them when they move on to that next step. We're going to be talking about all that when we return on the Working Ranch Radio Show.
At the American Akaushi Association, we're more than prime. The American Akaushi Association was created to help ranchers be more profitable and find opportunities when using Akaushi genetics in their herd. We focus on market opportunities for our members and offer support from conception to consumer. When you choose Akaushi, you have a network right there with you. Experience the difference at akaushi.com. That's AKAUSHI.com.
Control comes when you focus on the little things, from daily chores to parasite management, because any little thing could derail progress. But your herd can be covered. Visit GetLessParasites.com for solutions from Zoetis.
And we welcome you back here to the Working Ranch Radio Show. I'm Justin Mills. My guest today is Dr. Steve Paisley. He is the director of the research station for the University of Wyoming in Lingle, Wyoming. We've had him on our show before. Previously, he was the state beef extension specialist. And so, Dr. Paisley, again, thanks for joining us. We were talking in the previous section about preconditioning and just some of the elements that go into that and how we can be productive in that time that we do with preconditioning. Let's move on to weaning. And I know this is going to be a subject that we're going to have a lot of maybe some different answers or maybe different directions that people do. Because, for example, where you're at in southern Wyoming, and we can even move as far south as down into Texas, you guys were dry this year. And last year we were dry. So we did something different that we hadn't done in the past. And so when we get into weaning, there really is, I think there has to be a precursor to that says, what have been the situations that we're dealing with this year? That's going to be one of the issues, don't you think?
I think that's exactly right. Along those lines, is we think about what forage we have available, whether we can precondition how we want to wean those calves. The other thing is we think about how much variability we've had in precipitation and how that impacts forage quality. So even if we are producing some amount of forage out there, just the vast variability in forage quality, and that has a big influence on our weaning success. And so, back along the whole idea of doing our homework ahead of time, any type of forage analysis and kind of planning ahead and knowing what we're feeding to those calves is pretty important. But back to your point, though, I think along the lines of weaning, I think there are a lot of different options. In many cases, even if we aren't able to wean and dry lot the entire herd, many of us are probably going to end up weaning a portion of it, whether it's our replacement heifers, those that we keep back to replace the herd, some of those types of things. So I think there are avenues or other things to investigate as far as what are some ways to manage the current situation and still have an effective weaning program.
Mm-hmm. I feel for my operation here that weaning is something that we probably traditionally didn't always do that on this ranching operation. Several years ago, I started weaning, and where I'm at today, if you were asking me what I would think about weaning, I would say it is a practice that we really need to financially understand as producers before we go down that road. As you were talking just a little bit ago about knowing, what the value of that feed quality is, really knowing what are we going to have into this and what are we going to get out of it at the end of the day to whether or not whether we take that next step into weaning.
That's right. And for many years, I keep a spreadsheet and I estimate what those preconditioning costs are and our weaning costs, and do we receive that or do we recoup that additional cost through improved price at the sale barn? Mm-hmm. I think that's something we all need to think about. I look at it every year. And in years like this, where if we were to feed cattle in dry lot and we basically will have to purchase hay, and at least in southeastern Wyoming, it's not cheap right now.
Yeah.
We got to go in and buy hay to feed to those weaned calves. I think that's something to look at. What does that weaning program cost, and how do you want to manage that? Because the benefits of preconditioning are huge. I don't want to argue the fact that looking at those management programs are certainly important, but are you recouping that as far as sale price of those calves, however you choose to market them?
Mm-hmm. I feel sometimes that's a tough question. And mentally or psychologically, we want to have a heavy calf. That's in our minds. We want that weight, and we think we think weight is king, and not always is that the deal. Let's get at weaning here now a little bit, and some of the practices involved in that. And probably in the last 15, 20 years, we've definitely heard more of the concept of fence line type weaning versus getting away from the traditional lock the calves in the corral sort of a deal. So let's get into some of that from your standpoint, especially as BQA coordinator for the state of Wyoming. I'm sure there's some practices that really do benefit keeping the stress down in these calves.
Definitely there are. I think many operations have looked at that as an opportunity to reduce stress. And if you can wean those calves on pasture, you're reducing your feed costs, you're reducing your overall input cost on that weaning program as well. So there are economic benefits as well as health benefits to looking at a fence line weaning program. Does take a little bit of additional management, and there's always a few that get through the fence. Personally, our experience has been it's not so much the calves getting back in with the cows, but it's cows getting in with the calves in most cases. So looking at the management of that. The other thing that comes up quite often is the two-stage weaning process, or the nose clip program. That can be an option as well. I visited operations in Argentina and other South American countries that use a two-stage weaning program almost exclusively, where you put the nose clip in the calf, you leave the calf with the cow, so you get the cow to dry off first over a 2-week period, and then once that's accomplished, then you remove you do the whatever you say psychological weaning by removing the pair or separating the pair at the second stage. Both of those, I think they're both good programs. I think they both reduce the overall immediate stress, all ways to reduce stress, which will improve not only your immune response but reduce sickness. Anything we can do along those lines. Other things to think about too are many times we wean and we do every single practice we can think of to do with that calf at that time. So we're running it through. Maybe we're banding some calves. Maybe we've got to dehorn some calves. Maybe we're branding a few at that time as well. And when we stack on all of those stressors, one on top of the other, we're asking for probably some difficulty later on down the line.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, which that gets back to the timing of this that we had talked about when it comes to preconditioning. Is we really, again, with weaning, there needs to be some timing that we think about with when do we plan to market these calves, and we back that calendar up and so forth. And as you talked about the multiple practices that we try to stack on, I think everybody's probably done that, not on intentions, but like, well, shoot, we got them in the corral, we better take care of this right now. As we prep these calves before they're weaned, what are some things we can do while they're on the cow?
I think certainly we talked about it a little bit earlier, but address that mineral program as early as midsummer. It's not in the front of your mind. A lot of times we're kind of catching a sigh of relief and we're like, oh, we've got them off the home place. We've got them up on summer pasture. But addressing those mineral things, I think, are important to think about, again, ahead of time, thinking about whatever forage you do have on hand, sampling that and getting an idea of the quality that you have on hand. And then as far as if you do bring in help or you work with a group of people as far as weaning those calves, talking things through a little bit ahead of time. That's what I run into as BQA coordinator, is a lot of times we'll do some meetings this time of year just as a way to introduce new employees to BQA practices, low stress animal handling practices. And it's a good conversation starter to talk about how we do things, maybe how we try not to do things. all of that can have an impact on your weaning success.
Mm-hmm. You bet. And definitely, I think you brought up a good point there in that you do have help. Usually in these situations where we're preconditioning and or we're weaning later on down the road, having help that understands that everybody's on the same page with how we're moving cattle through these corrals, why we're doing this, why we're doing that, that's probably a pretty important thing.
It is. And, selecting for temperament is key to that, not only for employee safety, but also for an animal response to a vaccine. There's a lot of good data that would suggest an animal that is high strung or an animal that has a lot of tension or a lot of stress doesn't respond well to vaccine. It probably tests your working facilities as well as the quickness of your employees, all of those things. So if we can start some selection process along those lines, I think there's benefit to that as well.
You bet. Dr. Steve Paisley is my guest today. We're talking just some of the fall work that we do out here on the ranches with our cattle. In the first segment, we were talking about preconditioning. We were just talking about weaning a little bit ago. And when we come back, we're going to continue. We've got more to talk about on this. When it gets into fall work, what can we do to make the most of our time? It's not something where we want to be working these cows every week. And so how do we make the most of it? We're going to talk more about it when we return on the Working Ranch Radio Show. It's a competitive calf market, and buyers want calves that will perform, period. And a proven solution is Simmental. In fact, data from the Tri-County Steer Carcass Futurity from 2002 through 2018 on nearly 60,000 head of calves revealed that Simmental sired calves represented the highest carcass valued sire group over English and other continental breed groups. And the sire group that was the second highest carcass value was Sim Angus sire. So, the proof's right there. For low risk, high potential calves with earning potential, be confident that Sim Genetics will give you more per head, period. Stand strong, Simmental. And we welcome you back here to the Working Ranch Radio Show. I'm Justin Mills. My guest today is Dr. Steve Paisley. He's the director of the research station at Lingle, Wyoming for the University of Wyoming. And we have been talking fall work with our livestock. Of course, preconditioning falls into that. Weaning, and again, that's a situation that's going to be really determined whether or not, A, you have the feed on hand, I should say, number one, does it financially make sense for you to do it? And then down the road, as far as do you have the feed availability and those kinds of things that we were talking about. Dr. Paisley, before we get into some of the other conversations that we're going to have here, let's touch one more thing on weaning. And I think that would be the element. If you are going to wean, you need to really make it worth your time and effort. There needs to be a time frame that you really look at that. And I know last week we had Clint Berry on with Superior Livestock as he was talking about the benefits that he's seeing in the marketplace for these calves that are VAC 45 and weaned. And he said one of the worst things is to wean calves, but not for the full 45 days. That last 15 days could be really where the profit's at.
That's exactly right. If you look at K-State data, looking at the weight changes that calves go through during weaning. And so if we think about, certainly we talked about the health aspect of timing of weaning versus when you market those calves. We think about giving that vaccine. Typically, that calf will respond to that initial vaccine within about a 2-week period. Well, if you think about from a weight gain standpoint, if we wean those calves, we're obviously going through that balling period that first 2 weeks. Those calves are probably losing weight. So thinking about when we wean and how we time the marketing of those calves, that's exactly right. If we're going to sell those calves as weaned calves, we need to at least recoup some of that weight loss due to weaning. And so, thinking about that, if we try and sell those calves at 3 weeks after weaning, we're probably, from a cost standpoint, not only do we have the expense of the vaccine and the feed associated with weaning those calves, but a weight loss is an additional expense that we're looking at there. Give them a chance to recover and rebound from that weaning and from that stress and regain some weight and try and recoup some of that through weight gain. I think that's an important aspect. And as you mentioned, the VAC 45 program kind of takes that into account. But buyers also know that hopefully by 45 days, those calves are straightened out. Mm-hmm. I've just worked with a couple of ranches that were facing the feed shortages that we've just been talking about, and they were looking at their feed savings by preconditioning calves and then trying to wean them a week to 2 weeks after that preconditioning shot. And I'm like, boy, that's probably a recipe for a pretty tough weaning period. So thinking about all of that timing, whether you choose to dry lot them or not, timing is everything, man. So try and take some of that into account as you develop a plan for weaning.
You bet. All right, let's get into some of the cow work. We've been talking primarily about calves with preconditioning and weaning. Let's talk about cows and the work that we do there. Of course, it is the time of the year where we have that opportunity to, get them preg checked if we want to do that. That's usually highly advised for the sake of, especially if you're in a situation where so much of the southern part of the country has been extremely dry. The last thing you want to do is to winter a cow without a calf. When it comes to fall work with our cattle, from your perspective, what are some of the focuses we need to be looking at?
I certainly think that preg testing those cows is important, even if, and I guess think a little bit about marketing those cows as well. A lot of times, as you mentioned, we want to get those cattle, for those cows that are open that are not going to be productive for us, we want to get them off the ranch if at all possible. But if you look at historical marketing prices for open cows or cull cows, they're at their seasonal low in October and November. So maybe consider custom feeding or dry lotting those cows elsewhere just to avoid that seasonal low, as well as putting some weight on those cows prior to marketing them. So if we can put them in a dry lot and try and market those cows, its price rebounds pretty dramatically in January and February. If we can put a little weight back onto those cows, they tend to be pretty efficient as they regain that condition that's lost over the summer months. Look at ways to manage that open cow and maybe get some marketing opportunities with those cows as well, something to consider. Yeah. It's also a time to think about maybe select or sort if we are facing a year with limited forage resources or high-priced hay, making some culling decisions on that herd, whether it's soundness, dentition, age of those cows, temperament. We've even gone as far to look at weaning weight of those calves and comparing it to mature weight of the cow and kind of using a percentage to determine what cows we want to get rid of as well. As
you were talking about a little bit ago, the marketing time frame for these cull cows is seasonally at its lowest around that October-November timeline. One of the things, and this is tough to do, and I'm going to say this, that I'm not good about doing this, is that would probably be a little bit more proactive from a ranch management standpoint, would be that when we have cows that are dry in the spring, that we get rid of them then, and there's probably a better chance they're going to hit a better market.
That's exactly right. I think there's a lot of opportunities. You look at the spring. Even this spring was a pretty good example of that as well. I think we do, as you've probably talked about it a lot, Justin, and on this program, that a lot of times there's so many management considerations for every operation. I think a lot of times marketing is on the back burner for us, and cull cow marketing is probably a number one of those that I think we just don't put enough time and effort into marketing those. And if you think about it, there are probably 15 to 20% of our receipts from a cow herd. So they are worth some consideration when we think about how we market those cows, and trying to add value to those cows prior to marketing them is pretty important.
Yeah. And I say that with 100% guilt that I've been bad about doing that. So a bit ago, you talked a little bit about from the preg checking side of things about doing that either with a vet or the blood tests that are out there. What's your experience with the blood tests that are available, that are starting to, you're hearing a little bit more about them now?
Yeah. On my own personal herd, I use the blood test exclusively, and that's just because I think it's minimal stress on those cows. You can run them through. You're probably doing some other operation with those cows anyway. We can tail bleed that cow with minimal effort and with minimal discomfort to the cow. The only issue is there's a lag time. So if we were preg testing at the chute, we could sort those cows immediately as they went through the chute. The problem with this is you've got to take the blood sample, mail it off, get the analysis, and then you're looking at about a week lag time to getting the response back or the information back. But it's a very accurate test. I think I've used it a lot just because it's a good management tool. I trust it. I think it's very little stress I especially like doing it with replacement heifers, just because it's minimal stress on those heifers and a real accurate response. So it is an option to think about, especially say you choose a year where you are having to wean early. Maybe you're weaning in August or early, some type of early weaning program. It's a great tool to use in those situations because you can detect as early as 28 days with very high accuracy. Yeah.
Well, you kind of answered my next question when they're at the very end of your response there. What's the time frame that how soon can you tell this? And that's kind of what I was aware of, is around that 28-day period, which, like you say, from a management standpoint is quite beneficial. Replacement heifers, like you said, is probably one of the easiest ways because they don't have a calf on them. So when you go out to sort those off, it's easy to pull those opens out without really a big disturbance and messing with any calf. So good information there on the blood test deal. Real quickly, from just doing it and getting it done, time frame of the shoot work there, what's that like on the blood test?
So cost wise, it's $2.50 per sample for the analysis. And then if you figure your tubes and shipping, you're probably looking at about $3 per head to do it. Timeline, you can tail bleed as fast as you can Preg test, or maybe faster. So just working the cattle through the chute, it's not that bad. And then by the time you mail it off, 2 days shipping, 2 days to get the analysis, and then an email back, you're looking at probably 4 to 5 days to get the information back on your operation.
You bet. And you need to have good tag numbers in your cattle.
Yeah, so that's the interesting thing. Is it's almost indirectly a great tool for a management standpoint, because if you're sending a tube in, she better have an ear tag so you can find her later on, and it actually gives you a pretty good inventory number as well. So it's actually kind of indirectly a good management reminder as you do it.
You bet. Well, Dr. Paisley, just before we go here, just some final comments from you about this fall time of the year that we all as ranchers go through, and just from a management standpoint, BQA standpoint that you represent, just some final thoughts.
Yeah, I think weaning is obviously, we think about the critical control points we have on our herd. Weaning is probably number one, right? It's an important aspect to think about. It's definitely a management opportunity, not only for the calves, but for our cow herd as well. So weaning is an important date for us. It's an important period of time in our production cycle. So, thinking and doing your homework ahead of time, whether it's addressing your mineral needs and mineral supplementation prior to weaning, thinking about your preconditioning program and what vaccines you want to use, working with your local veterinarian and coming up with a vaccination plan is pretty critical. And then as we mentioned before, thinking about marketing and having that as a part of the plan and as marketing as a part of the decision-making process is important as well. So doing your homework, that's kind of what we say time and time again, but trying to do some of these things ahead of time, reduce the stress at the time of weaning, and then think about as you get those calves weaned, maximizing your marketing, not only of the calves, but of those cows as well once you've got them weaned. All
right. Well, again, Dr. Paisley, I appreciate you taking the time here today to join us on the Working Ranch Radio Show.
You bet, and I appreciate the opportunity and listen to your program regularly. So you're doing a great job. We appreciate it.
You bet. Again, Dr. Steve Paisley has been my guest here today as we talk about everything from preconditioning, weaning to fall cow work, all of that combined. It is that time of the year. And as he said, too, it's a good time of the year to make some management decisions and utilize that time frame in the corrals to get some of that work done. So appreciate him joining us on our program here today. Well, stay with us. When we come back, meteorologist Don Day joins us as we take a look at our long-term weather, and he'll answer that question as to what is the purpose meteorologically for hurricanes out in the ocean. We'll talk about it when we come back after this. For commercial cow-calf producers, crossbreeding with Gelbvieh Balancer is the smart, reliable, and profitable choice. Gelbvieh Balancer females offer maternal superiority through increased fertility, greater longevity, and more pounds of calf weaned per cow exposed. In the feed yard, Balancer cattle can offer increased performance, improved feed efficiency, and have excellent carcass merit. Balancers add the pounds, make the grade, and deliver the value. Gelbvieh Balancer, the smart, reliable, and profitable choice. For more information, go to gelbvieh.org. And we welcome you back here to the Working Ranch Radio Show. I'm Justin Mills, as we're joined now by meteorologist Don Day with a look at our long-term weather. And Don, this time of the year, it's always hard to really knuckle down on just exactly what's going to happen right away, although you know that there is something in the works. And when we look at about this third week of September, we see something potentially happen. You're just not sure the intensity of it yet.
Yeah, we're getting into that time of year where the jet stream is getting more active. You start to see stronger systems come out of those higher latitudes and push further south. And we're likely going to see that here in the week ahead, with the western half of the country getting some colder weather, some good chances of rain showers and thunderstorms, and even some high country snow in the central and northern Rockies. But it could be a week of contrast, Justin, as that colder weather dives into the western and northern parts of the United States. There could be a lot of heat pushed ahead of it. So we could be looking at some very warm September weather in the Corn Belt, the Great Lakes, and a good part of the eastern part of the country, while the West is exactly the opposite. And as you change seasons, as the weather patterns change, as the seasons change, you can get these big swings. You can get a lot of, we call it weather whiplash, where you kind of go from one extreme to the other. And we saw that in this past week. Over the past week, we saw some colder weather. We saw some of the first snows in some of the northern Rockies, while some parts of the eastern United States were very warm. And we may see that pattern repeat itself.
Mm-hmm. Here in the last couple of weeks, we've seen a little bit more hurricane activity after getting through the month of August with nothing taking place. We've seen some in the Atlantic, also off the coast, the Baja coast of Mexico, and it has affected our weather across the country the last couple of weeks. But last week I was listening to one of your podcasts, and I thought it was interesting to hear your explanation of the purpose of hurricanes as a sort of an equilibrium purpose out there when it comes to the water temperatures. So I wanted to have you explain that a little bit.
Yeah, in fact, one reason that hurricanes and low pressure systems and storms develop is to try to reach equilibrium. That's what the atmosphere is trying to do all the time. As the earth has warm spots and cold spots and dry spots and wet spots, we get these storms to form. And what they do is they serve a purpose. They serve a purpose to release energy, try to get the atmosphere back into equilibrium. Of course, the equilibrium never happens, but Mother Nature keeps trying. And one reason we have tropical storms and hurricanes is that it happens during the warmest time of the year, near the equator and in the tropics. And there's a big contrast between that heat near the equator and the colder conditions up to the north. So what they do is the sea surface temperatures, as they get warmer, hurricanes, when they form, actually help regulate sea surface temperature patterns by the rainfall and the clouds and the wind. It actually cools off parts of the oceans that used to be really warm. So you get more and more hurricanes that actually cools things off a little bit. So hurricanes serve a purpose. They serve a purpose to try to bring equilibrium to the atmosphere. The problem is that the contrast between those very warm water temperatures near the equator and those cooler water temperatures in the north generate these very large storms that can be quite destructive.
Mm-hmm. And speaking of water temperatures, real quick to kind of check in, because we still see La Nina there, those cooler waters along the equator still there. And then in contrary to that, warmer waters up off the coast of Alaska.
Yeah, it's interesting. When you look at the sea surface temperature anomalies across the globe, we still have this very large patch of cooler than average water near the equator in the Pacific. That's La Nina, and it's still holding firm. Like the modeling was suggesting it was going to be through the fall. But we're also seeing a warming trend in sea surface temperatures across the North Pacific. And what that does tend to lead to is that tends to lead to some stronger storm formation later on in the fall and into early winter. If we continue to see that contrast between the colder near the equator and the warmer temperatures up in those higher latitudes. So there's a lot of moving parts, and it's going to play a really big role in how the winter goes, Justin, because as we expect La Nina to fade, as we get into January timeframe around the first of the year, if we see those warmer temperatures in the North Pacific continuing, that actually is a signal for cold for the lower 48 states when you have the colder conditions near the equator and those warmer temperatures up further north.
All right. Well, we'll continue to watch and see how that develops. And of course, at some point here, we're going to need to schedule or dedicate a full show to just our weather outlook for the late fall and winter of 2023.
Yeah, we've got a lot to talk about in that regard.
All right. Well, thanks for joining us here on the Working Ranch Radio Show.
Thank you.
And again, that was meteorologist Don Day with a look at our long-term weather. And like we were talking about just moments ago, I will let you know, kind of give you a heads up, plenty of weeks ahead notice when we plan to schedule that show entirely dedicated to our long-term weather outlook for the winter months of 2022-23 and into the spring of 23 as well. What they're tracking, that's very useful information for us, of course, here in agriculture. By the way, if you'd like to follow Don Day on a daily basis, his daily weather video podcast, you can go to his website at dayweather.com. Well, stay with us. When we come back, I'll give you an idea of what we're going to be working on for upcoming shows when we return on the Working Ranch Radio Show.
Do you have a young child, grandchild, niece, or nephew that loves the weather and wants to learn more? Day Weather has produced a children's weather journal full of weather facts, fun weather experiments, coloring pages, and pages to record weather observations for every season of the year. The weather journal is for ages 3 to 7 and designed to be fun and educational. The interactive weather projects are fun for the whole family to take part in. For only $10, the Day Weather Journal is a great gift idea for any occasion. Click on our Amazon link to order at dayweather.com.
Well, as we head back to the barn on this episode of the Working Ranch Radio Show, I want to reiterate a little bit of what I talked about last week when we were closing the show out about the latest issue of Working Ranch magazine. Is quite phenomenal. I do want to point out to one particular articles here as we close out our show today, and that is on the pros and cons of retained ownership feeding. Now, it's an article written by Burt Rutherford, but that really is an issue that a lot of folks hear about it and maybe have never dabbled in it or messed with it at all, and not certain where to even begin on that process. And so I think this article does a good job of spelling out the pros and the cons of retained ownership. So take a look for yourself. It's in the latest issue of Working Ranch magazine. It starts on page 78. Well, before we head out here today, I want to let you know, also continuing to work on some upcoming future shows here that I hope to bring to you. Steve Cody, who is kind of known out there for low-stress cattle management, specifically in placing cattle on large allotments. He's going to be joining us for about a 3-part series that I'm excited to bring to you. In addition, we're also working on an interview where we can talk about solar pumps for livestock wells or watering out of our reservoirs. Yeah, it's kind of something that's definitely becoming more and more useful for us out here in the country. Well, before we go, I do want to thank our sponsors of the Working Ranch Radio Show, Gelbvieh Balancer, the smart, reliable, and profitable choice. For more information, go to their website at gelbvieh.org. And Zoetis, visit inheritprogress.com to request a call with a rep and ask about free TSUs to get you started. And speaking of Zoetis, it's the little things that could derail progress, but your herd can be covered. Visit getlessparasites.com for solutions from Zoetis. Also, the American Akaushi Association. Experience the difference at akaushi.com. And finally, Biozyme. It is weaning time, so for protection and recovery, think VitaCharge by Biozyme. For more information, visit vitafirm.com/Vita-Charge. Well, the Working Ranch Radio Show is a production of Working Ranch Magazine, branded #1 by America's Ranchers. Now, if you'd like to get a hold of me, please don't be afraid to reach out and let me know if you have questions about the show or if you have topics you'd like us to cover. My phone number 307-363-COWS, or my email address is justin.workingranch@gmail.com. Now, you can also find me on social media as well, Facebook, Instagram. My handle there is justinmills.wyocowboy. Thanks again for joining us. We'll be right here, same time, same place next week, or on your favorite podcast provider. I'm your host, Justin Mills, and until next time, keep your chin down and your mind in the middle. So long.